To stand in the center of the Gomantong Cave in Borneo is to understand the absolute weight of darkness. It is not merely an absence of light, it is a physical pressure that presses against your chest. The air here is thick, humid, and heavy with a scent that you will never truly scrub from your memory. The sharp, stinging aroma of ammonia that burns the back of the throat. You are standing in a limestone cathedral, a massive void in the earth where the floor itself seems to move, shifting and seething with the life of millions of cockroaches and beetles feasting on the decay below. High above you, hidden in the black recesses of the ceiling, lies the source of one of the most expensive ingredients on the planet. This is not a place of luxury. It is a vertical grave for the men who fall from the heights, and a factory for the creatures that fly. Tonight, we are not discussing a golden roast or a delicate pastry. We are examining a bowl of soup that costs more than its weight in gold, born from this filth, crafted from the fluids of a small bird. It is a dish that represents the ultimate paradox of food history. Absolute squalor birthing absolute prestige. This is the story of the $10,000 soup made of spit. The architect of this industry is a creature that, at first glance, seems entirely unremarkable. It is the white-nest swiftlet, scientifically known as Aerodromus fusifagus. If you saw one darting through the fading light of dusk, you would likely mistake it for a common swallow. It is a small, frantic bird, barely the size of a human hand, with dull, brownish-grey feathers that offer no camouflage against anything but a cave wall. Yet, this unassuming bird possesses a set of biological tools that make it a marvel of evolutionary engineering. Unlike other birds that rely on sight to navigate the world, the swiftlet has conquered the dark. It lives its life in the pitch-black recesses of limestone caverns, places where the sun has never reached. To survive here, it has developed a form of echolocation, similar to a bat, emitting a rapid series of clicking sounds that bounce off the wet, jagged walls of the cave, painting a sonic map of its home in the complete absence of vision. But it is not the bird's navigation that makes it valuable to the culinary world. It is its glands. Specifically, a pair of enlarged sublingual salivary glands located just under its tongue. For most of the year, these glands are dormant, performing the mundane task of moistening food. But when the breeding season arrives, a biological switch is flipped. The glands swell to an enormous size, taking over the bird's metabolic focus. The swiftlet does not gather twigs or mud or moss to build a home for its young. It does not weave grass or collect spiderwebs. Instead, it looks inward. It builds its home entirely out of itself. The process is a feat of immense physical depletion. The bird flies up to a vertical face of limestone, gripping the slippery rock with small, sharp claws. It begins to weave its head back and forth in a rhythmic, hypnotic motion, vomiting a clear, viscous fluid onto the stone. This is not the saliva you or I produce. It is a thick, protein-rich mucus that begins to harden the moment it is exposed to the air. The bird acts as a biological 3D printer, laying down layer after microscopic layer of this fluid. It is slow, agonizing work. A single nest, which is essentially a small, shallow cup, large enough to hold 2 tiny eggs, takes roughly 35 days to complete. Consider that duration, over a month of constant labor. During this time, the bird is expending a significant portion of its bodily resources. It is literally converting its own biological reserves into architecture. The sheer caloric cost of producing this amount of high-grade protein is staggering for an animal of such slight stature. It flies out into the jungle to hunt for insects, eating on the wing, digesting them, and converting that energy into the glutinous material it needs to continue the construction. If the bird is healthy and the season is wet, the saliva is clear, white, and pure. If the bird is stressed, or if the season is dry and food is scarce, the saliva becomes thinner, sometimes tinged with blood or impurities, a sign of the physical toll the construction is taking on the creature's body. There is a profound intimacy to this material. When we look at a bird's nest in a museum or a tree, we see a collection of found objects, twigs, leaves, trash. But when you look at the nest of the Aerodramus fusifagus, you are looking at the bird itself. You are holding a solidified piece of its life force. It is a structure made of pure effort, a tangible record of thousands of flights and thousands of regurgitations. This structure serves as a cradle made of exhaustion, and for centuries, this solidified exhaustion has been scraped off the walls of caves, cleaned of its feathers and mites, and dissolved into a soup that emperors and tycoons believe will give them eternal youth. We are consuming the bird's depletion to fuel our own vitality. It is a parasitic relationship in the truest sense, wrapped in the guise of culinary refinement. To understand the true cost of this ingredient, you must appreciate the architectural impossibility of its creation. The swiftlet is not building upon a flat branch or a stable ledge where gravity is a friend. It is building on a vertical, often inverted face of damp limestone, high in the crushing darkness of the cave ceiling. The bird is attempting to construct a nursery that defies gravity, anchored only by the adhesive power of its own fluids. The process begins with the foundation. The male swiftlet selects a specific spot on the rock face, often returning to the exact location where he was born. He hovers, clinging to the stone with those tiny, sharp claws, and begins to pulse his throat. The sublingual glands, now swollen and heavy, secrete the first deposit. It is not a liquid spray, but a thick, viscous gel. It emerges as a clear, gummy strand, possessing the consistency of a partially set resin. The bird presses this first strand against the rock, holding it there for a moment. This is the foot of the nest, the anchor that must support the weight of the structure, the eggs, and eventually the parents themselves. In the humidity of the cave, the saliva does not dry instantly. It cures. It reacts with the air, slowly losing moisture and hardening into a substance that feels like a cross between dried glue and brittle plastic. The bird must wait for this foundation to set before it can continue, a slow, rhythmic patience that dictates the pace of the construction. Once the anchor is secure, the true weaving begins. The bird adopts a trance-like motion, swinging its head in a repetitive figure-8 pattern. It is a biological loom. It deposits the saliva in long, continuous threads, layering them back and forth, over and over again. This is not a solid lump of material. It is a lattice. If you were to look at a high-quality nest under a magnifying glass, you would see the individual strands, distinct and separate, woven together like a wicker basket made of glass. The engineering required here is precise. The base of the nest, the part attached to the wall, must be thick and reinforced, acting as a heavy bracket. As the walls of the cup extend outward, away from the stone, they must become thinner and lighter to reduce the torque on the anchor point. The bird instinctively graduates the thickness of the walls, creating a tapered structure that is heavy at the back and paper-thin at the rim. It is a cantilevered balcony made of spit. Day after day, the bird returns to add another millimeter to the rim. It works in the dark, guided only by the echoes of its own clicks and the tactile feedback of the hardening resin against its beak. It is a slow accumulation of material, a few strands, a pause to let them harden, and then a few more. If the bird works too fast, the wet saliva will slump under its own weight, ruining the shape. If it works too slow, the breeding season will pass it by. The shape that emerges is a perfect half cup, a shallow bowl designed to cradle 2 eggs against the vertical wall. It is translucent, with a color ranging from pearl white to pale ivory, depending on the minerals in the cave water and the diet of the bird. But let us not romanticize it too much. While it looks like a sculpture carved from alabaster, it remains a visceral object. It is a solidified bodily secretion, a hardened biological fluid that has been pumped out of a living creature's throat for over a month. When you hold a raw, unprocessed nest in your hand, it feels surprisingly rigid, like a piece of dried pasta or a brittle seashell. It has a snap to it. It is hard to believe that this durable, structural material was liquid only weeks ago. It is a testament to the sheer transformative power of the swiftlet's biology, turning internal moisture into external masonry. But this masonry is not stone, it is protein, and that protein is exactly what the harvesters are coming for. The bird has spent 35 days building a nursery, draining its own vitality to create a safe harbor for its young, and in doing so, it has painted a target on the ceiling of the cave. If you were to take that brittle architectural cup and dissolve it, not in a soup pot, but in a mass spectrometer, the romance of the natural world would quickly fade, replaced by the cold, hard lines of organic chemistry. To the bird, the nest is a nursery. To the market, it is a commodity. But to the body, the nest is simply a delivery system for a very specific, very potent set of molecules. We are no longer talking about twigs or mud. We are talking about a complex biological compound known as a sialylated mucin glycoprotein. That is a dense, clinical term for something you actually know quite intimately. Mucin is the primary component of mucus. It is the slimy, protective coating that lines your stomach, your lungs, and, yes, your own saliva. It is the lubricant of life, the gel that keeps our internal machinery from grinding itself to dust. When the swiftlet weaves its nest, it is essentially creating a solidified, high-concentration structure of this vital lubricant. The nest is roughly 60 to 65% protein by weight, but it is not the kind of protein you find in a steak. It is a structural protein bonded tightly with carbohydrates, sugars, that give it that unique glass-like stability when dry and that distinct gelatinous slip when wet. But the true value of the nest, the chemical signature that separates it from a common egg white or a piece of gelatin, lies in a specific molecule found at the very tips of those protein chains. It is called sialic acid, or more specifically, N-acetylneurominic acid. In the world of biology, sialic acid is a negotiator. It sits on the surface of cells and acts as a signal flare, mediating the interactions between cells and the outside world. It helps the immune system distinguish between self and invader. It is critical for brain development and neural transmission, and the nest of the Aerodromus fusifagus is one of the richest natural sources of sialic acid on the planet. This is where the ancient mysticism of the East meets the rigid analysis of the West. For centuries, traditional Chinese medicine has claimed that the nest washes the lungs and boosts the immune system. Chemically, there is a logic to this that is almost startling. Sialic acid often acts as a decoy receptor. Many viruses, including the flu, latch onto sialic acid on the surface of your cells to gain entry. The theory, clinical yet hopeful, is that by consuming a soup rich in this acid, you are flooding your system with decoys, trapping the pathogens before they can breach your own defenses. You are eating the bird's shield to reinforce your own. However, we must look at this with a cynical eye. The presence of a molecule does not guarantee its absorption. When you consume this $10,000 soup, you are subjecting these delicate glycoproteins to the brutal acid bath of your own stomach. How much of that precious sialic acid actually survives digestion to reach your cells is a matter of intense debate. Are you truly absorbing the vitality of the bird, or are you simply digesting a very expensive sugar protein matrix? The science is promising, showing potential for anti-inflammatory effects and cell regeneration in controlled lab settings. But the human body is a chaotic environment compared to a petri dish. This chemical reality also explains the physical transformation of the dish. The mucin part of the glycoprotein is hygroscopic. These molecules are thirsty. When you soak the dry, brittle nest in water, the proteins do not dissolve, they relax, they unfurl. The hydrogen bonds that held the structure rigid in the open air begin to grab onto water molecules, trapping them within the protein lattice. The nest swells, expanding 7 to 8 times its original weight. It transforms from a hard, plastic-like shard into a soft, trembling gelatin. This is not a melting process. It is a rehydration of the bird's original effort. You are essentially adding water back into the saliva to return it to the state it was in the moment it left the bird's mouth. You are eating the texture of luxury, a mouthfeel that costs a fortune, derived entirely from the unique way these specific proteins hold onto water. It is a chemical trick, a molecular sponge. And it is this specific chemical rarity, the difficulty of finding this exact protein structure in nature, that begins to explain why the price tag defies all logic. Let us move from the molecular to the financial. It is easy to dismiss the astronomical price of bird's nest soup as a symptom of excess, a folly of the ultra-rich designed solely to burn money. But if you strip away the marketing brochures and look strictly at the logistics of supply, the numbers begin to make a terrifying sort of sense. In the commodities markets of Southeast Asia, high-grade white nests frequently trade between $3,000 and $10,000 per kilogram. To put that in perspective, silver currently trades at roughly $700 per kilogram. You are looking at a biological waste product that commands a market value nearly 10 to 14 times higher than a precious metal mined from the earth. To understand why, you must understand the unit of measurement involved. We trade gold in ounces. We trade nests in cups. A single, perfect nest weighs roughly 8 to 10 grams. That means to assemble a single kilogram of this product, a bag no larger than a standard sack of flour, you effectively need the completed homes of 100 to 120 birds. If we recall the math of the previous chapter, where one nest equals 35 days of labor, a single kilogram of this ingredient represents nearly 10 years of cumulative avian labor. Then there is the issue of scarcity. Unlike chickens or cows, which we have bent entirely to our will, the Aerodramus fusifagus is notoriously difficult to domesticate in the traditional sense. You cannot put it in a cage. It must fly free to hunt. You cannot force feed it. It must catch its own prey on the wing. This means the supply is capped by the carrying capacity of the local ecosystem, yet the demand is theoretically infinite. As the middle class in China expands, the appetite for this status symbol grows with it. It is the ultimate Veblen good, a luxury item where the demand increases because the price is high. This creates a ruthless grading system that rivals the diamond trade. In the back rooms of trading houses in Hong Kong and Singapore, nests are scrutinized with the intensity of a jeweler examining a cut stone. At the top of the pyramid is the super grade, or AAA cup. This is a nest that is perfectly shaped, a pristine half-moon with thick, strong threads and a color that glows like antique ivory. It must be clean, free of feathers, and crucially, it must be intact. The moment a nest cracks or crumbles, its value plummets. A broken nest is chemically identical to a whole one. It has the same sialic acid, the same proteins, but it is worth a fraction of the price. These fragments, known as biscuit or cake grade, are pressed together into blocks and sold to the mass market for bottled drinks. But the wealthy do not want fragments. They want the structural integrity. They want the visual proof that the bird completed its work and that the harvester removed it with surgical precision. We often hear the term white gold thrown around in food documentaries, usually as a lazy shorthand for anything expensive. But here, The comparison to mining is literal. The value of the nest is directly tied to the difficulty of its extraction. We are about to walk into the caves where this harvest happens, and you will see that the price tag is not arbitrary. It is hazard pay. When you hold a perfect, unbroken cup in your hand, you are holding a receipt for a risk taken by a human being. The premium you pay for that perfect shape is the premium paid to a man who stood on a bamboo pole, hundreds of feet in the air, in total darkness, and managed to pry the nest loose without shattering it. The market dictates that the harder the nest is to reach, the purer it likely is, and therefore, the more it costs. The most expensive nests often come from the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the cave, where the humidity is stable and the air is still. This creates a perverse economic incentive. The more dangerous the location, the higher the bounty. The economy of the bird's nest is built on a simple, brutal equation. The vertical distance a man is willing to climb is directly proportional to the price the market is willing to pay. We have looked at the bird, and we have looked at the chemistry. Now, we must look at the human cost. We must leave the sterile world of biology and economics and enter the physical reality of the harvest. We are going to the cathedral of darkness. If you are expecting a pristine, sterile environment for the production of a $1,000 ingredient, you are in the wrong hemisphere. The journey to the harvest begins not with sight, but with scent. Long before you see the limestone cliffs rising out of the frantic green of the Bornean jungle, the air changes. The heavy, sweet smell of rotting vegetation and wet earth is suddenly cut by something sharper. This scent acts as a chemical warning signal, a density of air so thick it feels solid, indicating you are approaching a concentration of life that has altered the atmosphere itself. You are approaching Gomantong. In the local dialect, the name commands a certain reverence, but physically, it presents itself as a fortress of stone. The entrance to the main cave, Simud Hitam, is not merely a hole in the ground. It is a massive, gaping maw in the side of a limestone hill, rising nearly 300 feet into the air. It looks less like a geological formation and more like the entrance to a ruined cathedral built by giants. Vines drape across the opening like tattered curtains, and the darkness inside is absolute. It is not the quiet, passive darkness of a basement. It is a heavy, pressurized blackness that seems to push back against the daylight. Crossing the threshold from the jungle into the cave is a sensory shock. The temperature does not drop, as you might expect in a cavern. Instead, the heat becomes stagnant. The ventilation is poor, stifled by the geometry of the rock, trapping the body heat of millions of living creatures. The humidity spikes to near saturation levels. The air here is thick, a palpable suspension of water vapor, dust, and pulverized organic matter. Breathing requires effort. You are inhaling the exhalations of a colony that has occupied this space for centuries. It feels oppressive, as if the cave itself is trying to push you out. Then, your ears adjust to the roar. From the outside, the cave seems silent, but inside, it creates its own weather system of sound. It is a constant, high-pitched static, a wall of white noise created by the overlap of millions of individual cries. You are hearing the chaotic symphony of two massive populations sharing a single roof. By day, the bats hang in restless clusters, chittering and shifting in their sleep. By night, they exit in a spiraling vortex to hunt, passing the swiftlets who are returning home. But inside, the sound never truly ceases. It is the sound of the swiftlets' echolocation, that rapid-fire clicking, bouncing off the wet limestone walls, overlaid with the deeper, rustling murmur of the bats. It is a sonic assault that disorients the human equilibrium, stripping away your ability to judge distance or direction. As your eyes struggle to pierce the gloom, the scale of the interior reveals itself. The ceiling vaults upward, disappearing into the shadows 90 meters above your head. It is a vertical void, vast enough to fit a 30-story building inside without touching the walls. Shafts of sunlight pierce through collapsed sections of the roof high above, cutting through the haze like spotlights in a dusty theatre. These beams illuminate the drifting particles in the air, feathers, dust, and insects, turning the atmosphere into a glittering golden fog. It is undeniably beautiful, in a grim, Gothic sense. It feels ancient, indifferent, and profoundly hostile to human life. And while your eyes are fixed on the ceiling, searching for the white gold, you must be very careful where you step. Because the floor of this cathedral is not made of stone, it is made of something else entirely. When you look down in Gomantong, your mind initially refuses to process what it is seeing. In the dim, filtered light that spills from the cave mouth, the floor appears to be moving. It ripples, like the surface of a dark, disturbed lake. But this is not water. You are looking at a living, breathing carpet of insects, millions upon millions of cockroaches, a density of life so staggering that they obscure the ground entirely. They are the Periplaneta, the custodians of this underworld, and they are here for a very specific reason. They are here for the guano. For centuries, the swiftlets and the bats have roosted on the ceiling, raining down their waste in a ceaseless, microscopic drizzle. Over hundreds of years, this waste has accumulated not in inches, but in meters. In the center of the great cave, the mound of guano is estimated to be dozens of feet deep, a massive, fermenting hill of biological refuse. It is this mountain of waste that generates the heat and the ammonia that choke the air. It is a decomposing engine, a compost heap the size of a city block, and it is the foundation upon which the entire cave ecosystem rests. To walk across this floor is a grim affair. There is a wooden boardwalk that cuts through the center of the cavern, a narrow, slick path raised above the seething mass below. But the wood is perpetually damp, coated in a slime of condensation and stray droppings. It offers precarious footing at best. If you were to slip, if you were to step off the edge of that timber, you would not land on solid earth. You would sink. You would plunge into a soft, shifting mixture of semi-liquid decay and frantic, chitinous bodies. It is a nightmare scenario that every harvester knows intimately. The floor is not a surface you stand on, it is a substance you fall into. This layer of filth is, ironically, a thriving metropolis. The cockroaches are merely the visible workforce. Beneath them, and moving among them, is a specialized ecosystem of scavengers that have evolved to live in the dark, feeding solely on the detritus of the birds above. There are long-legged centipedes, Scutigera, that dart across the rock faces like animated skeletons. There are cave crabs, pale, ghostly crustaceans that have adapted to a life far from the ocean, scavenging for scraps in the dark. They are the cleaners, the biological mechanism that prevents the cave from filling up entirely. They turn the death and waste of the ceiling into the living soil of the floor. And where there is prey, there are predators. If you shine your flashlight carefully along the walls near the floor, you will see the glint of scales. These are the cave racers, Orthriophis tenuis, snakes that grow to 6 feet in length. They have adapted perfectly to this environment. They do not need to hunt in the traditional sense. The density of prey is so high that they simply need to exist. They glide over the carpet of cockroaches, feeding at will, or drape themselves over the stalagmites, waiting to snatch a bat out of the air. They are the dragons of this dungeon, silent and pale, thriving in an environment that would kill a human through infection alone. The harvester must navigate this filth to reach the prize. He must walk the slick boardwalks, knowing that a single misstep on the ladder doesn't just mean a broken bone, it means landing in the living carpet. But the floor is only the beginning of the danger. The true challenge lies not in what is below your boots, but in the terrifying vertical distance that stretches above your head. To understand the true nature of the harvest, you must stop looking at the floor. You must crane your neck back, straining against the vertebrae until your eyes find the ceiling. It is a movement that instantly induces a sense of vertigo. In the open air, looking up at the sky grounds you. It reminds you of your place on the earth. But here, in the enclosed throat of the mountain, looking up unmoors you. The ceiling is not a flat surface. It is a chaotic, undulating landscape of stalactites, fissures, and domes that disappears into the gloom. And it is incredibly, terrifyingly high. We are talking about a vertical rise of nearly 90 meters. In imperial measurements, that is 300 feet. To put that into a context that your brain can actually process, imagine a 30-story skyscraper. Now, imagine stripping away the glass, the steel, the elevators, and the stairs. Imagine hollowing out the interior until it is nothing but a dark, damp shell. That is the Simud Putti. The nests are not conveniently located at eye level. They are plastered into the highest, most inaccessible crevices of this 30-story void. The birds, driven by an evolutionary imperative to protect their young from the snakes and rats below, have sought the one defense that terrestrial predators cannot breach: altitude. The wall you must climb to reach them is not a solid, reliable surface. This is limestone, specifically a geological formation known as karst. Limestone is a sedimentary rock born from the compressed skeletons of ancient marine life. It is porous. It dissolves. Over millions of years, rainwater and groundwater have eaten away at the stone, creating a surface that is jagged, unpredictable, and sharp. It is like climbing a wall made of broken pottery and solidified sponges. But the geometry of the rock is only half the problem. The real enemy is the moisture. The humidity in Gomantong is perpetually near 100%. The walls are never dry. They are coated in a permanent sheen of condensation, a slick, microscopic layer of water that acts as a lubricant between skin and stone. In some places, the water drips constantly, a slow, rhythmic torture that erodes the rock and makes every handhold a gamble. In others, the walls are covered in a thin, green slime of algae or a dusting of guano that has drifted down from above, turning the limestone into a surface with the friction coefficient of ice. There is no room for error here. In a modern climbing gym, or even on a recreational outdoor climb, you have the safety of a harness, a rope, and a belayer. You have friction tape and chalk to dry your hands. Here, the environment is actively working to reject you. The darkness distorts your depth perception. When you look up with a flashlight, the beam flattens the world. A ledge that looks deep and secure might be a sloping illusion of shadow and light. A protrusion that looks solid might be a brittle flake of calcified rock ready to snap off under the weight of a human body. The silence of the height is also deceptive. As you ascend, the roar of the insects on the floor fades, replaced by the isolated echoes of the water dripping and the wind moving through the upper vents. It creates a sense of isolation that is psychological as well as physical. You are leaving the world of the ground dwellers and entering the airspace of the swiftlet. The higher you go, the more the air changes. It becomes thinner, yet somehow heavier, with the ammonia rising from the pit below. You are climbing through a column of toxic air, gripping wet rock, with nothing beneath you but a lethal drop into a sea of cockroaches. To bridge the gap between the floor and the ceiling, to conquer the 90 meters of death in between, man had to invent a solution. He had to build a forest inside the cave. The solution to the 90-meter problem is not a helicopter. It is not a hydraulic lift, nor is it a steel gantry bolted into the rock. The solution is ancient, organic, and to the modern eye, utterly terrifying. To reach the ceiling of Gomantong, The harvesters have built a forest within a cave. They have constructed a massive, intricate lattice of bamboo and rattan that rises from the guano floor all the way to the vaulted roof. It is a piece of engineering that defies modern safety codes, a structure that relies on tension, friction and faith, rather than blueprints and steel bolts. This structure is known simply as the bagang. From the ground, looking up through the hazy shafts of light, it resembles a chaotic spiderweb spun by a giant drunken arachnid. Poles crisscross at odd angles, jutting out into the void, overlapping and intersecting in a way that looks haphazard. But this chaos is an illusion. The grid is a masterpiece of intuitive physics, a design that has evolved over centuries to solve the specific problem of climbing a wet, irregular wall in the dark. The primary material is bamboo, specifically a thick, heavy variety known locally as bula tumpump. This is not the decorative bamboo of a garden fence. It is structural timber, harvested from the surrounding jungle, dragged into the cave, and hauled up by hand. Bamboo is chosen for a very specific reason. Its strength-to-weight ratio rivals that of steel, but unlike steel, it is not rigid. In a cave where the walls are uneven and the ground is shifting guano, rigidity is a liability. If you built a rigid steel scaffold here, the first tremor or shift in the floor would snap the bolts or buckle the frame. Bamboo bends. It absorbs the stress. It breathes with the cave. But the true genius of the grid lies in how it is held together. There are no nails in Gomantong. A nail drives into the fibers, splitting the wood and creating a weak point that the humidity would exploit within weeks, rotting the joint from the inside out. Instead, the harvesters use rattan, Rotan saga, a climbing vine that is stripped, soaked, and used as a lashing. The mechanics of this lashing are a lesson in material science. When the rattan is wet, it is pliable, leather-like, and easy to wrap. The builder lashes the horizontal bamboo pole to the vertical one, winding the vine in a specific, tight pattern. As the rattan dries in the cave air, it shrinks, it contracts, it bites into the skin of the bamboo, creating a friction joint that is stronger than any clamp. The more weight you put on the joint, the tighter the friction holds. It is a fastener that gets stronger as it sets, a biological clamp that strangles the timber into submission. Standing on this grid is a sensory experience that induces immediate nausea in the uninitiated. The structure is not static. Because it is held together by lashings and flexible poles, the entire grid moves. When a harvester climbs a ladder 80 meters up, the vibration travels through the web. The platform you are standing on sways. It groans. The bamboo rubs against the rattan, producing a low, rhythmic creaking sound that echoes in the darkness, a constant auditory reminder that you are standing on dried grass suspended over an abyss. You are not standing on a floor. You are balancing on a single pole, perhaps 3 inches in diameter. Your toes grip the curve of the wood. Your hands grasp the vertical struts. There are no safety rails. There are no catch nets. There is only the grid, a 3-dimensional maze of beige lines sketched against the black void. To move from one section to another, you do not walk, you traverse. You slide your feet along the pole, testing the weight, trusting the friction of the rattan knots tied by a man who might have been working in total darkness. And there is a catch. The cave is a hostile environment for organic materials. The same humidity that keeps the birds' nests soft also attacks the bamboo. The rot is inevitable. A bamboo pole in Gomantong has a lifespan. The fungi and the dampness eat away at the fibers, turning the strong, springy wood into a brittle, hollow shell. The rattan lashes fray and loosen as the moisture cycles change. This means the grid is never finished. It is in a constant state of repair and decay. The grid becomes a structural ship of Theseus. Every season, before the harvest begins, the climbers must inspect the web. They tap the poles, listening for the hollow thud of rot. They inspect the knots. They replace the beams that are too far gone, lashing new green bamboo next to the old grey bones of the previous years. Often, a harvester will be suspended 90 meters in the air, standing on a pole that he knows is rotting, while he lashes a new pole into place to replace it. He is repairing the bridge while standing on it. It is a continuous, desperate maintenance cycle, a race to keep the infrastructure from collapsing back into the guano. The grid is a living thing, consuming the forest outside to sustain the harvest inside. It is a testament to human ingenuity, yes, but also to human desperation. It is a structure built on the edge of failure, held together by vines and courage, serving as the only pathway to the white gold on the ceiling. If you were to equip a modern mountaineer to scale a 90-meter vertical face, the inventory list would be extensive. There would be dynamic ropes tested in Swiss laboratories, spring-loaded camming devices made of aircraft-grade aluminium, shock-absorbing helmets, and harnesses designed to distribute the force of a fall across the pelvis and thighs. The gear would be rated, certified, and redundant. It would be a technological shield against gravity. In Gomantong, the inventory is different. The men who climb into the darkness to retrieve the white gold carry a kit that would not look out of place in a museum exhibit on the Middle Ages. There are no carabiners here. There are no nylon static lines. The toolkit of the harvester is defined by a terrifying simplicity. It consists of 3 primary elements: a light, a pole, and a ladder made of vines. The primary instrument of extraction is the juluk. To the uninitiated, it looks like a simple stick, but it is a specialized extension of the harvester's arm. It is a long, slender pole, usually made from a single, straight piece of bamboo, or, in more recent years, a telescoping aluminium rod. At the very tip of this pole sits the business end of the industry, a specialized iron scraper. It resembles a small, modified hoe or a flat-bladed spatula, sharpened on one edge and curved to match the concavity of the cave wall. Using the juluk is an exercise in leverage and muscle memory. The harvester must stand on the swaying bamboo grid, look straight up into the gloom, and manipulate this tool with surgical precision, often 10 or 15 feet above his head. He must wedge the iron blade between the limestone and the hardened saliva of the nest. If he pushes too hard, the nest shatters, raining down as worthless confetti. If he pushes too gently, the nest stays stuck, and he wastes precious energy. He must find the exact angle to pry the foot of the nest loose in a single fluid motion. It is a task that requires the delicacy of a dentist performing an extraction, but performed at the top of a 30-story building while balancing on a tightrope. Then there is the means of ascent. While the bamboo grid provides the horizontal structure, the vertical movement often relies on the rattan ladder. This is not a ladder in the rigid Western sense. It is a rope ladder woven from the same rattan saga vines used to lash the grid. It is flexible, organic, and unnervingly alive. When a harvester steps onto a rattan ladder, it does not stay still. It stretches, it twists, it swings in the open air, turning the climber into a pendulum suspended in the dark. Ascending a rattan ladder requires a specific rhythmic technique. You cannot fight the swing, you must move with it. The rungs are often spaced unevenly, tied by hand, meaning the climber cannot operate on autopilot. He must look at every placement. And unlike a rigid ladder that leans against a wall, the rattan ladder often hangs free in the void, meaning there is nothing behind the climber but air. He is climbing a spider thread, counting on the tensile strength of a dried jungle vine to hold his body weight against the pull of the earth. Perhaps the most striking absence in the harvester's kit is the lack of personal protective equipment. You will rarely see a helmet. You will almost never see a safety harness. But the most glaring omission is footwear. The majority of the skilled climbers work barefoot. This is not due to poverty. It is a calculated survival strategy. In the slick, slime-coated environment of the cave, a rubber boot is a liability. It numbs the sensation. It separates the man from the surface. The harvester needs to feel the wood. His calloused soles act as sensors. He needs to feel the grain of the bamboo to know if it is slippery. He needs to feel the slight give in the wood that indicates rot. He needs to curl his toes around the pole to create a friction lock that no boot could replicate. The skin of the foot becomes the primary point of contact with the architecture of the cave. It is a visceral, tactile connection, flesh against wet wood, suspended over a mountain of filth. Finally, there is the tool of communication: silence. In a modern construction site, there are radios and shouting. In the upper reaches of Gomantong, the work is often done in a concentrated quiet. The harvesters rely on the acoustic feedback of the cave. They listen for the creak of a stressing bamboo pole. They listen for the snap of a dry vine. They listen for the specific tink sound of the iron scraper hitting the rock, which tells them they have found the base of the nest. In this environment, noise is dangerous. A shout can be lost in the roar of the swiftlets, so they work in a bubble of focus, illuminated only by the narrow beam of a battery-powered headlamp strapped to their foreheads. That beam is their entire world. It cuts a tunnel through the dust and the dark, illuminating only the next handhold, the next rung, the next nest. Anything outside that beam, the drop, the cockroaches, the other men, ceases to exist. It is just the man, the vine, and the courage to take the next step. The climb, the danger, and the tools are all dictated by a single, unforgiving variable: the biological clock of the swiftlet. The harvest at Gomantong is not a continuous year-round operation like a copper mine or a lumber yard. It is a seasonal event, a synchronized raid that must align perfectly with the reproductive urges of the colony. If the harvesters arrive too early, there is nothing to take. If they arrive too late, the product is ruined. This creates a high-stakes timeline, a calendar written in saliva and instinct. The cycle is divided into two distinct windows, each with its own specific strategy and ethical calculus. The first season begins in February and runs through April. This is the wet season in Borneo, when the jungle is flush with insects and the birds are at their physical peak. It is the time of the white harvest, and for the traders in Hong Kong and Shanghai, this is the only season that truly matters. During these months, the male swiftlets begin their construction. They are fueled by the abundance of food outside the cave, and their glands are producing the purest, clearest saliva of the year. They work their 35-day shift, weaving the perfect cup. But here lies the cruelty of the industry. The goal of the harvester is to intervene at the precise moment of completion, but before the female can lay her eggs. It is a game of brinksmanship. The climbers watch the progress of the nests day by day, tracking the thickness of the rim. They must wait for the nest to be fully formed to maximize the weight and the profit, but they cannot wait a single day too long. The moment an egg is laid in that cup, it becomes legally and culturally dirty. In the past, unscrupulous harvesters might have tossed the eggs, but modern regulations and lingering superstitions make this taboo. A nest with an egg is a nest that belongs to the bird. So, the harvesters strike in a window of mere days. They climb the grid, scrape the pristine, unused nests off the wall, and leave the birds with nothing. This act is not just theft, it is a manipulation of the bird's biological imperative. The swiftlet, driven by an overwhelming instinct to reproduce, does not give up. It cannot. It immediately begins to build again. This leads to the second phase of the cycle, the recovery period. The bird, now physically depleted from building the first home, must scrape together the metabolic resources to construct a second one. This nest is often smaller, the walls thinner, the saliva less copious, but it is enough. The female lays her eggs in this second, desperate construction, and the colony is allowed to rear its young. The harvesters retreat. The cave is left to the birds for the incubation and the fledging. This period of quiet is critical. If the harvesters were to take the second nest, the generation would be wiped out, and the industry would collapse within a few years. It is a form of parasitic conservation, stealing the luxury model, but allowing the economy model to survive so that the workers can return next year. The second harvest window opens later in the year, usually around July to September, only after the chicks have flown. The harvesters return to the cave, but the prize has changed. They are no longer scraping pristine, white cups. They are harvesting the used nurseries. These nests, the second build, are radically different. They are stained with the waste of the chicks. They are embedded with the downy feathers the young birds shed as they grew. They are often crumbling, weakened by the weight of the family they supported. These are the black nests, or lower-grade white nests. They require immense processing. They must be soaked and picked apart with tweezers to remove the filth of the nursery. They sell for significantly less, but they represent the volume of the trade. They are the mass-market product, destined for bottles and lower-priced soups. This cycle, steal the first, spare the second, scavenge the ruins, turns the cave into a machine. It forces the bird to work double shifts, converting every ounce of its energy into architecture for human consumption. The harvester is racing against the physiology of the animal. Every day the bird spends building is a day the harvester waits. Every egg laid is a profit lost, and every fall from the bamboo grid is the price paid to maintain this unnatural schedule. The timing must be perfect, because in the dark, a mistake in timing doesn't just cost money. As we are about to see, it costs blood. The precision of the harvest cycle, the careful monitoring of the nest, the counting of days, the strategic theft of the bird's labor, suggests a controlled industrial process. It implies that this is a business like any other, governed by schedules and quotas. But there is a variable in the equation that no amount of planning can eliminate. The bamboo rots, the rattan dries out, the limestone sweats, and gravity, unlike the market, never fluctuates. It is a constant, patient force, waiting for a single moment of inattention. In the village that sits at the edge of the jungle, and in the temporary settlements that spring up around the cave mouth during the harvest season, there is a shared, unspoken understanding. Everyone knows someone who did not come down. The trade is hereditary, passed from father to son, but so is the grief. It is a grim inheritance. When a young man steps onto the bamboo grid for the first time, he is often climbing the same route that killed his uncle or his grandfather. He is placing his bare feet on the same slick poles, trusting the same knots, inhaling the same ammonia-heavy air. The mechanics of a fall in Gomantong are terrifyingly specific. In a construction accident on a city street, there is noise. There is the screech of metal, the shouting of co-workers, the siren of an ambulance. In the cave, the accident is defined by its silence. When a lashing snaps or a bamboo pole splinters under the weight of a climber, the sound is swallowed by the roar of the swiftlets. The cave is so large and the background noise of the colony is so dense that a man can slip from the grid and fall 90 meters without anyone 10 feet away even turning their head. The fall itself is a plunge into sensory deprivation. Because the harvesters work with headlamps, their world is limited to the cone of light in front of them. When they lose their footing, that light spins. The walls, the ceiling, and the grid become a strobe-lit blur. Then, there is just the dark. The climber falls through the humid void, passing through the layers of the cave's atmosphere. He falls past the lower levels of the grid, past the circling bats, past the ledges where the snakes wait. There is no safety net. There is no water to break the impact. There is only the floor. And as we have established, the floor is not merely hard, it is alive. Surviving the fall is often worse than the alternative. A man who falls from the upper reaches touches the ground with the force of a car crash. Bones shatter, the spine compresses, and he lands in the guano. If the impact does not kill him, the environment immediately begins to attack the injury. The floor of Gomantong is a petri dish of bacteria and fungi, thriving in the decomposition of millions of years of waste. An open fracture here, a bone protruding through the skin, is a death sentence of infection waiting to happen. The rescue is not a swift affair with a stretcher and a helicopter. It is a slow, agonizing extraction. His fellow harvesters must descend from the grid, navigate the slick boardwalks, and carry him out through the carpet of cockroaches, dragging him back to the surface world that feels 1,000,000 miles away. Yet, the climbing continues. The day after a fall, the grid is full again. This persistence is not born of ignorance, it is born of economics. The blood money of the bird's nest trade is a powerful motivator. In a region where agricultural wages might amount to a few dollars a day, a successful season on the ropes can support a family for a year. A single kilogram of white nests, harvested in a few hours of terrifying work, represents a fortune that would take a lifetime to earn in the rice paddies or the palm oil plantations. The climbers view the risk as a transactional reality. They are trading their safety for social mobility. They are gambling their bodies against the chance to lift their children out of poverty. It is a high-stakes wager made in the dark, accepted with a fatalistic shrug. They make offerings to the spirits of the cave before they climb. They adhere to the taboos. They respect the silence. They do everything they can to stack the odds in their favor. But they know that the house, the cave, always holds the advantage. This is the invisible ingredient in the soup. When a diner in a high-end restaurant lifts a porcelain spoon to their lips, they are tasting something that has been sanitized, double-boiled, and sweetened with rock sugar. The danger has been boiled away. The smell of the ammonia is gone. The memory of the dark is gone. But the value of that spoon, the reason it costs what it costs, is directly tethered to the man on the bamboo pole. You are paying for his willingness to hang over the abyss. You are paying for the silence of the fall. The luxury of the dish is not just in its rarity, it is in its mortality. We have sanitized the product, but the history of how it got to the table is messy, dangerous, and deeply human. To understand how such a perilous trade became a symbol of supreme refinement, we must leave the cave and travel back in time, to an era when the emperor's appetite shaped the economy of the entire South China Sea. To understand how a solidified secretion from a cave in the tropical jungle became the crown jewel of Chinese cuisine, we must trace the supply chain back to its absolute origin. We are stepping away from the modern bamboo grids of Gomantong and looking at a map of the world as it existed over 1,000 years ago. The story of the bird's nest is not just a culinary history, it is a history of maritime ambition, perilous navigation, and the peculiar economics of the imperial court. The timeline brings us to the Tang dynasty, roughly between 618 and 907 AD. This was a golden age of Chinese civilization, a period of immense cultural confidence and expansion. It was an era when the capital, Chang'an, was the largest and most cosmopolitan city on earth. But even with all its wealth, the Tang court had a ravenous appetite for the one thing it could not produce within its own borders: the exotic. In the ancient world, distance was the ultimate luxury. If an ingredient could be grown in the peasant's garden outside the city walls, it was food. If it had to be transported across 3,000 miles of treacherous ocean, surviving monsoons and pirates, it was a treasure. The bird's nest fell squarely into the latter category. It was a product of the Nanyang, the Southern Ocean, a vague, humid and dangerous region that encompasses modern-day Malaysia, Indonesia and the Philippines. For a trader in the Tang era, bringing this ingredient north was a logistical nightmare that makes the modern climb up the bamboo grid look almost manageable. The trade routes were not the streamlined shipping lanes we know today. They were a fragile, seasonal, vascular system powered by the wind. Merchants had to wait for the monsoons to turn. They sailed south on the winter winds, spent months bartering for goods, spices, sandalwood, pearls, and nests, and then waited for the summer winds to blow them back home. The vessels were wooden junks, sturdy but vulnerable. A single storm could scatter a fleet and send a fortune in spices and nests to the bottom of the South China Sea. Every bowl of soup served in the capital contained a hidden cost, the cost of the ships that didn't make it back. This attrition rate was baked into the price. When a Tang official sat down to dine, he wasn't just eating a rare protein, he was consuming the survivor of a shipwreck. But why the nest? Why did they choose this specific item out of all the strange and wonderful things in the tropical jungle? The answer lies in the imperial obsession with vitality. The Tang court was deeply invested in the pursuit of longevity and health. They were fascinated by the concept of qi, the life force, and they believed that consuming the essence of a living creature could transfer that vitality to the eater. The swiftlet presented a compelling narrative. Here was a bird that never seemed to rest, a creature of the air that ate on the wing and lived in the mysterious dark voids of the earth. And it produced this nest not from mud or sticks, but from its own internal fluids. In the logic of sympathetic magic, eating the nest was akin to eating the bird's endurance. It was a concentrated dose of life force, harvested from the edge of the known world. By the time the trade matured in the subsequent dynasties, the nest had become a standard form of tribute. This was not merely commerce, it was a political act. Local chieftains and sultans in the Malay archipelago would send crates of these nests to the emperor as a sign of submission and respect. It was a way of saying, "We acknowledge your power, and we offer you the best of our land." The nest, therefore, arrived in China not as a grocery item, but as a diplomatic envoy. It was catalogued, graded, and stored in the imperial treasury alongside ivory and jade. It moved from the chaotic, humid caves of Borneo to the silent, sterile storehouses of the Forbidden City. It was scrubbed of its context. The emperor did not see the cockroaches. He did not smell the ammonia. He did not see the barefoot men climbing rotting vines in the dark. He saw only the result, a pristine white cup that dissolved into a golden broth, a symbol of his reach extending to the very ends of the earth. This trade route laid the foundation for a culinary obsession that would outlast dynasties. It established the bird's nest as the ultimate import, a status symbol that proved you had the resources to command the ocean itself. But the true explosion of the trade, the moment where the nest went from a rare tribute to a legendary delicacy, would require a specific catalyst. It needed a celebrity endorsement. It needed an admiral who would sail into the heart of the Nanyang and bring the story of the nest back to the Ming court with the force of a revelation. If the Tang dynasty opened the door to the trade, it was the Ming dynasty that blew the hinges off. And the man holding the battering ram was not a merchant or a chef, but an admiral. His name was Zheng He, and his influence on the culinary landscape of Asia is arguably as significant as his influence on its maps. To understand the explosion of bird's nest soup into the cultural stratosphere, we must look at the legend of his voyages, a story that sits uncomfortably between historical fact and convenient mythology. Zheng He was the commander of the famous treasure fleet in the early 15th century. These were not the modest wooden junks of the Tang era. These were floating cities. His command ship was a behemoth, reportedly 400 feet long, leading an armada of nearly 300 vessels and 28,000 men. They were sailing to project the power of the Yongle Emperor, to collect tribute, and to map the known world. But even a fleet of that magnitude is small compared to the violence of a Southeast Asian monsoon. The legend, which has been retold in tea houses and trading posts for 600 years, centers on a moment of catastrophic failure. During one of his voyages through the Malay archipelago, likely near the coast of modern-day Indonesia, the fleet was battered by a severe storm. Cut off from their supply lines and blown off course, they were forced to take shelter in the lee of a desolate limestone island. The ships were safe, but the larder was empty. The rice was gone. The fresh vegetables had rotted weeks ago. They were stranded, and they were starving. Starvation is a powerful chef. It dismantles the concept of disgust and replaces it with the concept of calorie. The crew, desperate for anything to sustain them, began to forage on the barren rock. They found no fruit. They found no game. What they found, plastered high on the cliff walls in the damp caves, were thousands of white, cup-shaped nests. We must pause to appreciate the sheer desperation required for what happened next. Someone had to look at a hardened secretion of bird saliva, scraped from a wall covered in bat guano, and decide that it was food. It is the ultimate culinary gamble. But hunger dictates action. The sailors harvested the nests, washed them in the sea, and boiled them in their remaining fresh water. The result was not a flavorful stew. It was a gelatinous, tasteless sludge, but it was protein. The legend claims that after consuming the soup, the sailors didn't just survive, they thrived. Their energy returned, their complexions cleared. The heat of the feverish tropical sickness was lifted from their bodies. When the winds finally turned and the fleet limped back to Nanjing, they didn't just bring back maps and giraffes. They brought back the miracle food that had saved them. Zheng He presented the nests to the Yongle Emperor not as a desperate survival ration, but as a supreme tonic from the ends of the earth. This is the pivotal moment of rebranding. In the hands of a skilled storyteller, the soup of last resort became the soup of the immortals. He framed it as a secret of the Nanyang, a mystical substance that allowed the swiftlet to fly tirelessly over the ocean. By eating it, the emperor would absorb that same indefatigable vitality. It is a masterclass in marketing that modern luxury brands would envy. The reality that a starving crew ate bird spit because they had run out of rice was scrubbed away. In its place, a new narrative was constructed, a narrative of exclusivity, rarity, and magical health properties. The nest was no longer a symbol of poverty, it was a symbol of divine providence. This transformation from survival food to luxury good is a recurring theme in human history. Lobster was once prison food, caviar was peasant food, but the bird's nest is the most extreme example. Zheng He's endorsement cemented the nest's status in the imperial court. It became the ultimate souvenir of the emperor's reach. By serving it, the court was not just eating a meal, they were consuming the geography of their own empire. The admiral had turned a navigational error into a gastronomic triumph, and in doing so, he set the price of the nest on a trajectory from which it would never return. The survival meal of the sailor became the appetizer of the king. Once the admiral made the introduction, the imperial machinery took over. By the time we reached the Qing dynasty, specifically the long and prosperous reign of the Qianlong emperor in the 18th century, the bird's nest had graduated from a maritime curiosity to a culinary cornerstone. It was no longer the desperation meal of a stranded sailor. It was the headline act of the most elaborate menu in human history. The rough, salty stew of the coast had been refined, filtered, and elevated into a dish of such stark simplicity that it could only be served in the Forbidden City. We must look at the context of the table. The Qing court was obsessed with the Manhan Quanxi, or the Manchu Han Imperial Feast. This was not merely a dinner, it was a political maneuver served on porcelain. It was a legendary banquet designed to bridge the cultural divide between the ruling Manchu elite and the Han Chinese subjects. The feast reportedly consisted of 108 distinct dishes served over the course of 3 days. It was a marathon of consumption. In this parade of excess, the bird's nest held a position of supreme authority. It was categorized as one of the mountain delicacies, sitting at the high table alongside camel's hump, bear's paw, and monkey's brain. But unlike those heavy, gamey meats, the nest occupied a unique spiritual space. It was often served first, or as a palate cleanser, a dish of pure, translucent elegance designed to signal the start of serious dining. The preparation within the palace walls was a ritual of obsession. The rough nests arriving from the Nanyang were not thrown into a pot. They were handed over to the imperial kitchens, where armies of chefs and kitchen maids engaged in the process of purification that bordered on the neurotic. Using tweezers made of silver or gold, they would spend hours picking out every single microscopic feather, every grain of sand, every speck of ash. The goal was to produce a cup that was not just clean, but luminous. When cooked, the nest was typically double-boiled, a gentle, indirect heating method that ensured the delicate proteins did not seize or toughen. It was often served in a clear, superior stock made from ham and chicken, or as a sweet tong sui with rock sugar. The result was a bowl of soup that looked like liquid glass, with the gelatinous strands of the nest suspended in the broth like clouds of white silk. Here is the great irony of the dish, the secret that every honest epicure knows but rarely admits. The bird's nest has almost no flavor of its own. If you eat it raw or boiled in plain water, it tastes of nothing more than a vague, mineral earthiness. It is a blank canvas. In the context of the imperial court, this blandness was not a defect, it was a feature. It meant that the ingredient was a vehicle for texture, that prized kogan or mouthfeel that Chinese cuisine values above all else. It is slippery, soft, yet slightly elastic, a texture that glides over the tongue. But more importantly, the lack of flavor emphasized the status of the diner. When you serve a dish that tastes only of the expensive broth it is cooked in and the texture of the rare ingredient floating within it, you are making a statement. You are saying that you can afford to consume something purely for its rarity, not its utility. You are eating the distance it traveled. You are eating the danger of the harvest. You are eating the thousands of hours of labor required to clean it. The consumption of the soup became a theater of power. To serve bird's nest to a guest was to honor them with the resources of the empire. It was a way for the emperor to demonstrate that his reach extended beyond the land, beyond the sea, and up into the very crevices of the limestone cliffs. It was a display of infinite logistics. And there is a profound, almost jarring contrast in this image. Picture the Qianlong emperor dining in the palace of heavenly purity. The room is silent, save for the soft clink of a porcelain spoon against the bowl. The air is scented with sandalwood incense. The soup is warm, sweet, and perfectly clear. There is no trace of the ammonia that burned the eyes of the harvester. There is no echo of the screaming bats. The blood, the sweat, the rot of the bamboo grid, and the terror of the fall have all been filtered out. The food has been scrubbed of its history. All that remains is the luxury. The emperor swallows the saliva of a bird that lived and died in a cave he would never see, and in that silence we see the true power of the trade, the ability to turn a nightmare of logistics into a dream of refinement. But the emperor did not eat this soup merely to show off the length of his supply chain. He did not consume the dissolved labor of the Gomantong harvesters simply because it was expensive. In the intricate, paranoid world of the imperial court, food was never just sustenance, and it was certainly never just for pleasure. Food was the first line of defense against mortality. To understand why the bird's nest commands the price of a small car today, we must step away from the dining table and enter the quiet, herbal-scented air of the traditional apothecary. We must understand the medical justification that turned a bowl of flavorless gelatin into the holy grail of health. In the Western tradition, we tend to draw a sharp clinical line between the kitchen and the pharmacy. Dinner is for hunger. Pills are for sickness. But in the philosophy of traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM, this line does not exist. The body is viewed not as a machine of parts, but as a landscape of energies, a garden that requires constant balancing between the opposing forces of yin and yang. And in this landscape, the bird's nest is not a food. It is a weapon against the drying out of the human soul. The central concept here is yin. If yang is fire, action, heat, and dryness, then yin is water, rest, cooling, and fluid. As we age, or as we succumb to illness, the TCM model suggests that our bodies lose their yin. We dry out. Our internal fires burn too hot, consuming our vital fluids. We become brittle. Our skin loses its elasticity, our joints grind, and most dangerously, our lungs become parched. This is where the swiftlet enters the medical canon. The bird's nest is classified as a neutral to cooling tonic, specifically targeted at the lung meridian. Think of the lung not just as an airbag for oxygen, but as a delicate, moist membrane that is constantly assaulted by the outside world. In the dusty, coal-heated cities of imperial China, respiratory ailments were the great killers. A dry cough, a rasping throat, the slow wasting away of consumption. These were the signs of a body that had lost its moisture, a body where the internal fire was burning the organs into ash. The nest was the answer. It was seen as the ultimate biological moisturizer. The logic follows a principle known as sympathetic magic, or the doctrine of signatures, the ancient belief that like cures like. Consider the material itself. The nest is made of saliva. It is the solidified internal fluid of a creature that flies tirelessly. It is viscous. It is translucent. It is the very essence of moisture. The ancient physicians reasoned that by consuming this solidified fluid, one could replenish one's own vital fluids. You eat the bird's saliva to generate your own. You eat the nest to coat your own dry, cracking lungs with a layer of protective, restorative slime. It was prescribed for the most romantic and deadly of diseases, tuberculosis. When the rich and powerful began to cough blood, when their skin turned pale and their breath grew shallow, they did not reach for antibiotics, which did not exist. They reached for the double-boiled soup. They believed that the gelatinous proteins would graft themselves onto the lining of the lungs, sealing the wounds and cooling the inflammation. It was a poetic cure for a tragic disease, a soup made of air and water to heal the organ of air and water. But the mythos extended beyond the lungs. If the nest could hydrate the interior of the body, surely it could hydrate the exterior. This brings us to the second great pillar of the nest's value: vanity. The Empress Dowager Cixi, the formidable ruler who effectively controlled the late Qing dynasty, was famous for her obsession with youth. It is said she consumed 7 distinct dishes of bird's nest every single day. She wasn't eating for calories, she was eating for complexion. The belief remains unshakable today, that the nest nourishes the skin from within. It is sold as an edible cosmetic, a way to achieve that coveted, translucent look of the very wealthy. The idea is that the same proteins that harden to protect the swiftlet's eggs will harden and smooth the collagen of the human face. It is a compelling promise. You are not just buying dinner, you are buying time. You are buying a shield against the aging process, harvested from the ceiling of a cave. Modern science has attempted to catch up with this ancient intuition, validating the shield theory we explored earlier. We now know that the nests are rich in epidermal growth factor, EGF, and sialic acid, compounds that do, in fact, play a role in cell division and immunity. The glue that holds the nest together is chemically similar to the glue that holds our own cells together. So, the cynic might scoff at the price, but the chemist sees the logic. The emperor was not entirely wrong. He was paying for a concentrated dose of biological building blocks, hoping that the vitality of the bird would, through the alchemy of the stomach, become the vitality of the man. It was a transfer of power from the wild, dark cave to the failing human body, mediated by a spoon. If the medicinal value is the internal justification for the price, the social value is the external armor. We must understand that in the high-stakes ecosystem of Asian relationships, the bird's nest acts as a form of currency that is far more stable than the yuan or the ringgit. It is a medium of exchange used to purchase something that cannot be bought in a store: respect. To see this in action, you have to leave the quiet of the apothecary and enter the noise of the banquet hall. Imagine a wedding reception in a grand hotel ballroom in Hong Kong, Shanghai, or Kuala Lumpur. There are 50 tables. The lighting is crystal and gold. The noise level is deafening, a cacophony of toasts, gossip, and the clatter of chopsticks. But there is a specific moment in the choreography of the meal when the atmosphere shifts. It is the arrival of the soup course. When the servers bring out the individual porcelain bowls, lids on, steam escaping from the vents, a silent calculation ripples through the room. The guests lift the lids. If they see a clear broth with the unmistakable gelatinous strands of a high-grade whole cup nest, a message has been sent. The host is telling the room that he respects them enough to liquidate a significant asset for their momentary pleasure. He is signaling that his resources are vast enough to feed 500 people a dish that costs as much as a smartphone per bowl. This is the concept of mianzi, or face, the invisible scoreboard of dignity, prestige, and reputation that governs social interaction. In this economy, serving a cheap soup is not just a culinary failure, it is a social bankruptcy. It implies that you do not value your guests, or worse, that you cannot afford to value them. The bird's nest is a tool for accumulating face. It buys forgiveness for past transgressions. It buys leverage for future business deals. It buys the silence of critics. The soup is often the closer in a negotiation. A businessman seeking a contract does not take his client out for a burger. He takes him to a private room in a seafood palace and orders the double-boiled imperial bird's nest with rock sugar. It is a performative act of care. By watching the client consume the expensive proteins, the host is physically demonstrating his willingness to nurture the relationship. It is difficult to refuse a request from a man who has just fed you $100 worth of saliva for your health. This dynamic extends into the intimate sphere of the family through the gift economy. If you walk into a high-end pharmacy or a specialized dried goods store in Singapore or Bangkok, you will see the nests displayed like diamonds. They are not sold in plastic bags. They are encased in boxes that resemble jewelry cases, red velvet linings, gold lettering, heavy latches. These boxes are designed to be given, not kept. The most potent of these transactions involves the pregnant woman. In traditional families, the mother-in-law providing high-grade bird's nest to the expectant mother is a ritual loaded with expectation. It is not just a nutritional act, it is a dynastic one. The belief is that the nest will give the unborn child a perfect porcelain complexion and a robust immune system. It is an investment in the genetic future of the family line. For the recipient, however, the gift can feel like a heavy obligation. To accept the box is to accept the pressure of the family's hope. You are required to consume it, to perform the ritual of health, and to produce a healthy, beautiful heir. The nest becomes a physical manifestation of filial piety and parental sacrifice. This is why the price remains inelastic. You cannot haggle over the price of a gift meant for your dying grandfather or your pregnant wife without losing face. The high price is part of the function. If it were cheap, it would lose its power as a symbol of sacrifice. You are not paying for the mucin or the amino acids. You are paying for the ooh sound the recipient makes when they open a velvet box. You are paying for the nod of approval from the business partner across the table. In the complex web of Asian social debt, the bird's nest is the ultimate promissory note, a way to say, I value you, without ever speaking a word. If the cultural demand for face is infinite, but the supply of limestone caves is geologically finite, the market eventually hits a wall. You cannot force a mountain to grow faster. Nature takes millions of years to carve a cavern like Gomantong, and the swiftlet population within it is capped by the available surface area of the rock. For centuries, this scarcity was the primary driver of the price. The only way to get more nests was to find more caves, and by the late 20th century, every accessible crevice in Southeast Asia had been mapped, claimed, and harvested. But capitalism, much like the swiftlet itself, abhors a vacuum. If nature could not provide enough caves, the industry decided it would simply have to build them. This decision sparked one of the strangest architectural and agricultural shifts in modern history. It moved the harvest from the perilous, mist-shrouded cliffs of Borneo to the bustling, smog-choked streets of urban centres. It gave rise to the Swiftlet Hotel. Drive through the coastal towns of Malaysia, such as Siti Arwan, or the provinces of Kalimantan in Indonesia, and you will see them. They are ubiquitous, yet they look like nothing else in the architectural canon. They are monolithic, windowless blocks rising 3 or 4 stories above the palm trees and the tin roofs of the shophouses. They are usually painted in drab, utilitarian greys or whites. They have no balconies. They have no glass. To the uninitiated eye, they look like prisons designed for a very specific, very small type of inmate, or perhaps like bunkers built to survive a nuclear winter. Closer inspection reveals their true nature. The walls are punctured by rows of small PVC pipes, acting as ventilation shafts. Near the roofline, there is usually a single rectangular aperture, a dark mouth gaping open to the sky. These are not factories for manufacturing widgets, nor are they warehouses for storing grain. They are residential high-rises for Aerodramus fusifagus. The concept is a brilliant subversion of agriculture. Traditional farming requires you to domesticate the animal. You fence the cow, you pen the chicken, you control their movement and their diet, but you cannot cage a swiftlet. They are aerial insectivores that feed on the wing, catching bugs in flight over the jungle canopy. They cannot survive in captivity. So the farmers of Southeast Asia realized they didn't need to own the bird. They just needed to own the bedroom. They stopped chasing the birds into the dark and started inviting them into the light. The Swiftlet Hotel is essentially a concrete cave. It is a structure engineered to mimic the precise microclimate of the deep limestone caverns. The walls are thick to insulate against the tropical sun. The ventilation is calibrated to maintain that suffocating humidity we felt in Gomantong. The interior is kept in pitch darkness. This shift has fundamentally altered the geography of the trade. The danger has been relocated. In Gomantong, the risk was physical and immediate. A fall from 90 meters, a broken spine, a death in the dark. In the Swiftlet Hotel, the risk is financial and slow. A farmer might invest $100,000 to build a concrete bunker, only to find that the birds simply refuse to check in. The industry becomes a game of Field of Dreams played with saliva. If you build it, they might come, or they might not. But for those who succeed, the rewards are staggering. Indonesia has become the undisputed heavyweight champion of this new industry, producing the vast majority of the world's supply from these silent, grey towers. The farmed nest has flooded the market, stabilizing the price and making the soup accessible to the middle class, not just the emperor. Yet, the price remains high. Why? Because while we have removed the danger of the climb, we cannot speed up the bird. The biological limit remains. It still takes 35 days of exhaustion for the creature to weave its home. We have simply moved the construction site from a majestic, lethal cathedral of stone to a grim, efficient box of concrete. The romance is gone, replaced by industrial logic, but the product, the solidified labor of the bird, remains exactly the same. To enter a Swiftlet hotel is to step out of the blinding equatorial glare and into a simulated twilight zone. The experience begins with a heavy steel door, often secured with multiple padlocks, a reminder that the contents of this building are worth more per ounce than the building itself. You unlock the door, step through, and are immediately hit by a wall of sensory confusion. Outside, the air is hot, dry, and smells of diesel fumes and frying oil from the street stalls. Inside, the air is thick, wet, and cool. It smells of wet timber and a faint, sharp tang of ammonia, though it is far less aggressive than the chemical assault of Gomantong. You are standing in a concrete box that has been engineered to convince a wild animal that it is actually a limestone cavern deep in the jungle. The interior is a study in utilitarian darkness. There are no windows. The only light comes from the faint glow of the equipment LEDs or the beam of your flashlight. The walls are bare concrete, often painted black or dark green to minimize reflection. But the most critical architectural feature is above your head. The ceiling is lined with rows and rows of wooden planks, spaced about 30 centimeters apart, running the length of the room like the beams of an unfinished attic. These planks are the beds of the hotel. They are typically made from red Meranti or dark red Meranti, tropical hardwoods chosen for their specific porosity and resistance to rot. The wood cannot be too hard, or the bird's claws cannot grip it. It cannot be too soft, or the humidity will turn it into mush within a year. The surface of the wood is often grooved with shallow lines, scored by a machine to give the swiftlet a foothold. It is a tactile invitation, a wooden texture designed to mimic the roughness of a cave wall. The atmosphere in the room is maintained by a network of mist makers or humidifiers. These machines sit in the corners or hang from the ceiling, pumping out a fine, cold fog that keeps the relative humidity pinned between 80 and 90%. If the air is too dry, the nest will crack and detach from the wood, falling to the floor and becoming worthless. If it is too wet, mold will set in, staining the white gold with green and black spots. The temperature is strictly regulated to hover around 28 degrees Celsius. It is a life support system for a building material. The farming process itself is a paradox. In traditional agriculture, the farmer controls the animal's entire existence. He decides when the cow eats, what it eats, and where it sleeps. In swiftlet farming, the farmer is impotent. He is a landlord, not a jailer. He cannot feed the birds. Swiftlets will only eat live insects caught on the wing. They cannot be trained to eat from a trough. So, every morning, the residents of the hotel fly out through the roving hole near the roof to hunt in the surrounding palm oil plantations or forests. The farmer spends his day in a state of anxious passivity, hoping they survive the hawks and the snakes outside, and praying they decide to return to his concrete box at sunset. However, this controlled environment offers a massive advantage over the wild cave: hygiene. In Gomantong, a nest is built on a wall that might be shared with bats, centipedes, and water seepage. A cave nest is often stained red or orange by minerals and nitrates in the rock. It is full of grit. A house nest, by comparison, is the sterile suburban version. The floor of the hotel is concrete. It is swept regularly. To prevent ants and cockroaches from climbing the walls and attacking the eggs, the farmers often place the wooden racks on stilts, sitting in cups of oil or water, creating a moat around the nesting area. There are no bats to shower the nests with guano. There is no crumbling limestone dust. The result is a nest that is whiter, cleaner, and more uniform. It contains fewer feathers because the birds are not stressed by predators. For the processor, a house nest is a dream. It requires less labor to clean, less bleaching, and less waste. For the consumer, it is a purer product, though some purists still argue that the cave nest has a stronger mineral profile. But for the bird, the difference is negligible. It has simply traded the grandeur of the geological cathedral for the safety of the wooden plank. We have successfully industrialized the instinct to build, turning a biological compulsion into a tenant agreement. But the most difficult part of the hotel business is not building the room. It is getting the first guest to check in. To do that, we have to speak their language. If you build the perfect concrete cave, structurally sound and humidified to the point of saturation, it remains fundamentally a tomb. It is a cold, grey monument to potential. The swiftlet is a creature of deep, ancestral habit. It returns to where it was born, navigating by an internal map that has been etched into its biology over generations. To convince a wild colony to abandon their limestone cathedral and move into your new, unproven real estate requires a level of deception that borders on psychological warfare. You cannot bait them with grain, for they eat only on the wing. You cannot herd them with dogs. You have to sing to them. But this is not a song in any melodic, romantic sense. If you walk through the streets of a swiftlet farming hub in Indonesia or Malaysia, towns that have been effectively terraformed by this industry, you are assaulted by a sound that is distinct, pervasive, and utterly maddening. It is a high-pitched, staccato clicking. It sounds like a Geiger counter experiencing a panic attack. It is the sound of 1,000 digital birds screaming at once, looped forever, drilling into the humidity of the afternoon. The primary weapon in this arsenal is the piezoelectric tweeter. These are not high-fidelity speakers designed for orchestral nuance. They are cheap, harsh, plastic cones, usually arranged in hexagonal clusters around the roving hole at the top of the Swiftlet Hotel. They are pointed upwards, blasting their signal into the flight path of the passing flock, like an anti-aircraft battery made of sound. The audio tracks they play are the result of decades of trial, error, and acoustic theft. They are recordings of the colony at its most active, the chaotic, overlapping chirps that signal safety, numbers, and home. The farmer is broadcasting a calculated lie. He is projecting a phantom colony into the air. He is telling the passing birds, there is a party here, there is safety here, there is a mate here. It is a form of biohacking, exploiting the bird's social instinct to seek out the dense noise of the flock. The tracks are often categorized by function. There is the external sound, a loud, aggressive mix designed to pull the birds out of the sky from kilometers away. Then, once the bird crosses the threshold of the window, the internal sound takes over. This is softer, calmer, a rhythmic guiding track that leads the confused tenant down the dark corridors and onto the wooden planks. However, this reliance on audio has birthed a strange, invisible conflict, the volume war. In a town with 500 birdhouses, every farmer is competing for the same finite number of wild birds. If your neighbor installs a new sound system that is crisper, louder, or features a more seductive remix of the mating call, he might steal your colony. The birds might leave your quiet house for his noisy one. So, the response is escalation. Farmers buy bigger amplifiers, they add more tweeters, they turn the volume knob until the distortion is physically painful. The result is a landscape of noise pollution that transforms the human experience of the town. For the residents living in the shadow of these towers, the sound is inescapable. It starts at dawn when the birds leave to hunt, and it crescendos at dusk. It penetrates the walls of homes. It drowns out conversations in coffee shops. It is the relentless soundtrack of commerce, a constant grating reminder that the town's economy is built on the exploitation of a bird's ear. There is a profound irony in this modern shift. In the old days, the harvester had to climb into the exhilarating, terrifying silence of the deep cave, where the only sound was the natural roar of the colony and the rush of water. It was a physical, visceral engagement with nature. Today, the harvester sits in an air-conditioned office, tweaking the equalizer on a stereo system. He is not a climber. He is a DJ for a species he cannot touch. The labor of the climb has been replaced by the electricity of the amplifier. We have traded the risk of the fall for the headache of the screech. The bird is no longer hunted, it is seduced. And that seduction is broadcast at 90 decibels, echoing off the concrete walls of a ghost town built for birds. If the white nest is the porcelain of the industry, the red nest is its ruby. In the hierarchy of the trade, this is the apex predator of price. A high-grade blood nest, or shui yan, can command prices 3 to 4 times higher than the standard white cup. It is the sort of ingredient that sits behind glass in the most exclusive apothecaries in Hong Kong, glowing with a deep, unsettling crimson hue. It looks less like food and more like a harvested organ, a dried heart, or a solidified clot. And for centuries, the mythology surrounding this color has been the primary driver of its astronomical value. The legend is operatic in its tragedy. The story, told by merchants to justify the cost, claims that the red nest is the result of a swiftlet pushing itself beyond the brink of exhaustion. According to the myth, the bird builds its first nest, which is stolen. It builds a second, which is stolen. Desperate to lay its eggs before the biological window closes, it begins to build a third, but its salivary glands are depleted. It has no more fluid to give. So, in a final act of parental martyrdom, the bird coughs up blood from its own throat, mixing the crimson fluid with the last dregs of its saliva to construct a home. The red color, the buyer is told, is the literal lifeblood of the animal. It is a compelling narrative. It fits perfectly into the Chinese culinary tradition that equates suffering and effort with potency. If the bird died or bled to create it, the logic goes, then the energy contained within must be boundless. It frames the consumption of the soup as an act of absorbing the bird's ultimate sacrifice. The truth, as is often the case in this industry, is less romantic and more geological. The bird is not bleeding. If a swiftlet were coughing up enough blood to dye a nest deep red, it would be dead long before the construction was finished. The red nest is not a product of biological trauma, it is a product of chemical patience. The color comes from the cave itself. Specifically, it is a reaction between the nest and the environment. Red nests are almost exclusively found in specific deep caves in Thailand and Indonesia, usually in areas where the humidity is suffocatingly high and the ventilation is poor. The walls of these caves are rich in minerals, iron, manganese, and copper. But the primary agent of change is often the floor. The deep beds of guano on the cave floor release ammonia and nitrite vapors. As these vapors rise in the humid air, they are absorbed by the porous, protein-rich structure of the nest on the ceiling. This triggers a chemical reaction, a form of slow fermentation or oxidation. The white amino acids bind with the nitrites and the minerals leaching from the wet limestone wall. Over weeks or months, the nest begins to rust. It turns from white to yellow, then to orange, and finally, if left long enough, to a deep, blood-red purple. The red nest, therefore, is essentially a white nest that has been pickled by the atmosphere of the cave. The high mineral content, particularly iron, is real, and it does change the nutritional profile slightly, making the nest harder and crunchier even after long simmering. But the blood is simply rust and nitrate absorption. This reality creates a dangerous opportunity for the counterfeiter. If the difference between a $1,000 white nest and a $4,000 red nest is simply the absorption of nitrates, why wait for nature? Unscrupulous farmers and processors have realized they can fast-track the geology. In the back rooms of the industry, far from the eyes of the consumer, white nests are placed in boxes with wet bird manure. They are fumigated with sodium nitrite. They are dyed with industrial chemicals. In a matter of days, a cheap house nest absorbs the fumes and turns a convincing shade of crimson. These fake blood nests are not just a financial scam, they are a health hazard. High levels of nitrites are carcinogenic. So, the consumer seeking the ultimate vitality tonic is often buying a slow poison. The market is flooded with these dyed nests, leading to a constant arms race between the testing laboratories and the forgers. The true red nest is a geological rarity, a beautiful accident of chemistry and stone. But in the hunger for status, the market has incentivized the creation of a product that mimics the look of blood while delivering the toxicity of a chemical spill. It is the ultimate irony of the trade. The most expensive soup on the menu is the one that looks the most like a wound. We must now follow the harvest as it leaves the humid, deafening echo of the birdhouse and enters the cold, fluorescent silence of the sorting facility. If the cave is the mine, this is the refinery. It is here, in a room that smells faintly of egg whites and damp limestone, that the chaotic biology of the swiftlet is forced into the rigid categories of commerce. This is the border control between nature and luxury. When a crate of raw nests arrives at the facility, it does not look like food. It looks like the sweepings from a barbershop floor mixed with dried glue. We must strip away the romantic image of the translucent, golden cup sitting in a porcelain bowl. That is the finished product. The raw reality is far grittier. A freshly harvested nest is a construction site that has been frozen in time. It is a chaotic lattice of hardened saliva, yes, but it is also a trap for everything that lives in the aerial world of the bird. Embedded deep within the strands of the protein matrix are thousands of tiny down feathers, shed by the birds as they molted during the stressful construction period. There are mites, microscopic and dead, entombed in the walls like fossils in amber. There are pieces of eggshell, fragments of twigs, and inevitably, streaks of guano. To the uninitiated, it looks like trash. To the master sorter, however, this debris is just packaging. The value lies in the architecture underneath. The workers in this room, almost exclusively women, sit in rows at stainless steel tables, wearing white coats, hairnets, and surgical masks. They are the gatekeepers of value. Their job is to assess each nest in a matter of seconds and assign it a rank that will determine its destiny. The grading system is ruthless. It is based on a hierarchy of aesthetics that prizes symmetry above all else. At the very top of the pyramid is the supergrade, or the AAA cup. This is the platonic ideal of a bird's nest. To qualify, the nest must be a perfect, unbroken half-moon shape. It must be large, typically wider than 3 fingers held together. The weave of the saliva threads must be dense and uniform, with no gaps or holes. Crucially, it must be a light feather nest. This means the bird was clean when it built it, trapping very few impurities in the structure. These nests are the white gold. They will be sold whole, dried, and placed in velvet boxes to be given as bribes or dowries. They are valued not just for their mass, but for their structural integrity. When you hold a supergrade nest, it feels solid, like a piece of dried pasta. One step down, we find the grade B, or the oval nests. Perhaps the bird built its home in a corner of the cave, resulting in a shape that is slightly triangular rather than a perfect cup. Perhaps the rim is uneven. These nests are chemically identical to the supergrade, but they lack the visual perfection. In a market driven by face, a lopsided nest is a discounted nest. Then, we descend into the economy class of the trade. These are the yan tiao, or the nest strips. These are nests that cracked during the harvest. Perhaps the worker was too rough with the scraping tool, or the nest was too dry and shattered on impact. They are no longer cups, they are broken shards of protein. Because they cannot be displayed as a trophy, their value plummets. They are destined for the soup pot of the middle class, where they will be eaten for health rather than status. Finally, at the bottom of the barrel, we have the yan sui, or the nest crumbs. This is the dust of the industry, the tiny fragments that break off during transport or cleaning. This material is swept up, cleaned, and often pressed into cakes or bricks to simulate a larger structure, or sold to beverage companies to be suspended in sugary drinks sold at convenience stores. The crumb is the proletarian of the bird's nest world. It offers the same sialic acid, the same proteins, but none of the glory. The sorting room is where the illusion of the perfect nature is manufactured. The sorters are not just grading, they are curating. They are separating the gift from the grocery. They are looking at a chaotic, filthy biological byproduct and deciding which pieces can be sold as a miracle cure and which must be hidden in a bottle. It is a cold, clinical assessment of a warm, living process. But once the grade is assigned, the real work begins. The nest is graded, but it is still filthy. To transform this gritty, feather-choked structure into something edible requires a process of such tedious, mind-numbing detail that it essentially redefines the concept of cooking. We are about to enter the most expensive room in the supply chain, the cleaning room. If the harvest is the most dangerous job in the industry, the cleaning process is certainly the most tedious. To understand why a single bowl of soup can cost as much as a mortgage payment, you cannot simply look at the bamboo ladders of Gomantong. You must look at the hands of the women sitting in the silent, sterile rooms of the processing plants in Yan, Surabaya, or Georgetown. This is where the true cost of the bird's nest is incurred. It is not paid in adrenaline, it is paid in hours, in eyesight, and in a level of patience that borders on the monastic. We enter a room that feels less like a kitchen and more like a watchmaker's workshop. The lighting is harsh, clinical, and shadowless, provided by ring lights and magnifying lamps clamped to long stainless steel tables. The air is cool and smells faintly of damp earth and egg whites. There is no clanging of pots, no sizzling of oil. The only sound is the soft, rhythmic click of metal tweezers against porcelain bowls and the occasional splash of water. The raw nest, as we have established, is a dirty thing. It is a hardened matrix of saliva that has trapped the debris of the jungle. To make it edible, it must be purified. But you cannot simply wash a bird's nest in a machine. The structure is too delicate. The intricate lattice of protein strands would disintegrate in a tumbler. A centrifuge would turn it into sludge. So, the industry relies on the only tool sensitive enough to do the job, the human hand. The process begins with the soak. The dried, cement-hard nests are submerged in bowls of filtered water. This is the moment of transformation. Over the course of an hour or two, the nest drinks. It swells. It softens. The amber, brittle structure relaxes and expands to 3 or 4 times its original size. It becomes translucent, gelatinous, and floppy. It loses its structural rigidity and takes on the texture of a jellyfish that has washed up on the sand. As the nest expands, it reveals its secrets. The water loosens the grip of the saliva, allowing the hidden contaminants to float to the surface. But the most stubborn enemies, the tiny, downy feathers that the swiftlet uses to line the cup, remain trapped deep within the weave. These feathers are microscopic. They are soft, grey filaments that are almost invisible to the naked eye when dry, but which appear like dark veins in the translucent jelly when wet. This is where the tweezers come in. The worker lifts the sodden nest from the water and lays it out on a white towel or a backlit glass plate. She takes up her instrument. These are not the blunt tweezers found in a bathroom cabinet. They are surgical-grade, needle-nosed steel tools, sharpened to a fine point. She begins the pick. It is a motion that will be repeated thousands of times before the sun sets. She isolates a single strand of down feather, buried 3 layers deep in the gelatinous mesh. She guides the tweezers in, careful not to tear the protein strands surrounding it. She grips the feather. She pulls. She dips the tweezers into a small bowl of water to rinse off the debris. Then she goes back in. It is a fractal task. For every large feather she removes, she reveals 3 smaller ones underneath. It is like trying to remove the dust from a spider web without breaking the web. If she is too rough, the nest will tear. A torn nest loses its shape. A nest that loses its shape is downgraded from a super cup to a broken strip, losing half its market value in a split second. The pressure is immense. She is performing surgery on a creature's home, trying to preserve its architecture while evicting its furniture. A single high-quality nest can contain thousands of these tiny impurities. To clean one nest to the imperial standard, defined as being 98% pure, can take a skilled worker anywhere from 1 to 4 hours. 4 hours for a single serving of food. Multiply that by the wages, the electricity, and the overhead, and the economics of the soup begin to make sense. You are not just paying for the saliva, you are paying for the human life hours consumed in the purification. There is a strange, hypnotic rhythm to this work. If you watch it for long enough, it induces a sort of trance. The dip, the pull, the rinse, the dip, the pull, the rinse. It is the ultimate ASMR experience, a visual loop of cleansing that is both satisfying and horrifyingly slow. The workers enter a flow state, their world narrowing down to the 3 square inches of the nest in front of them. They do not speak. They cannot afford the distraction. There is also a semi-dry method, reserved for the highest quality, cleanest nests. In this technique, the nest is not fully soaked, but merely misted with water until it is pliable but still firm. This preserves the original shape even better, but it makes the feather removal even harder, as the saliva grips the debris more tightly. It is a test of grip strength and dexterity. Eventually, the nest is clean. It sits on the drying rack, a ghost of its former self. It is now pure white, or ivory, or a pale gold. It is clean enough to be dissolved in water and consumed by an emperor, or a CEO, or a pregnant mother. The filth of the cave is gone. The smell of the guano is gone. The labor of the sorting room has washed it all away, leaving behind only the protein and the price tag. The nest is now ready for the final stage of its journey, the kitchen. But as we will see, cooking this ingredient is not about adding flavor. It is about understanding the very specific, very strange texture of luxury. Now that the nest has been harvested from the perilous height of the cave, sorted by the ruthless eye of commerce, and purified by the endless patience of the tweezer, it is finally ready to be eaten. You would taste a faint, lingering sweetness from the rock sugar, or a whisper of egg white. But the nest itself is a ghost on the palate. In the high philosophy of Chinese gastronomy, This absence of aggressive flavor allows the focus to shift entirely to texture. Texture is refined. Texture is the playground of the aristocrat. To understand why a billionaire would pay a fortune for a bowl of tasteless jelly, you must understand the concept of kogan. Translated literally, it means mouthfeel. In the West, we have a very limited vocabulary for texture. We like things crispy or tender or creamy. If something is slimy or gelatinous, we tend to reject it as spoiled or unpleasant. But in East Asia, the spectrum of desirable textures is vast and nuanced. There is tui, crisp, nun, tender, hua, slippery, and the famous Q or QQ, a texture that denotes a specific type of bounciness, like a perfectly cooked tapioca pearl or an al dente fishball. The bird's nest occupies the throne of the slippery and gelatinous category. When properly rehydrated and cooked, the hardened saliva transforms. It does not dissolve into a liquid. That would be a sign of a cheap, fake nest. Instead, it softens into distinct, translucent strands that hold their shape. They look like glass noodles, but they do not feel like starch. When you put them in your mouth, the sensation is unique. There is a slip to it, a friction-free glide across the tongue that is incredibly soothing. It feels cooling, even if the soup is hot. But then, as you bite down, there is a slight resistance. It is not mushy. It pushes back against the teeth with a gentle, springy elasticity. It is soft, yet it retains a structural memory of the rock wall it was built on. It is this interplay, the slide followed by the snap, that the connoisseur is paying for. Think of it as the culinary equivalent of silk. You do not wear silk because it keeps you warmer than wool. You wear it because of how it feels against the skin. The bird's nest is silk for the tongue. It is a tactile luxury, not a gustatory one. This obsession with gelatinous texture explains the holy trinity of expensive Chinese dried seafood, the shark fin, the sea cucumber, and the fish maw. All three of these ingredients are, on their own, virtually tasteless. All three are essentially collagen sponges, and all three are prized because of how they manipulate water. They thicken a soup not with starch, which makes it heavy and cloudy, but with protein, which makes it glossy and rich. The bird's nest is the most delicate of the three. A sea cucumber is dense and meaty. A shark fin is fibrous and crunchy. But the bird's nest is ephemeral. It feels fragile in the mouth, as if it might dissolve if you hold it there too long. This fragility adds to the psychological experience of luxury. You are eating something that feels precious. You are consuming a structure that took a bird 35 days to vomit up, strand by strand, and you are destroying that structure in seconds with your molars. There is also a chemical reality to this mouthfeel. The soluble glycoproteins in the nest interact with the saliva in your own mouth. They coat the mucous membranes of the throat. This is why the soup is so often prescribed for a dry cough or a sore throat. It physically lubricates the passage. It leaves a coating that feels protective, a layer of biological moisture that lingers long after the soup is swallowed. So, when the emperor sat down to his bowl in the Forbidden City, he was not looking for a flavor that would excite him. He was looking for a texture that would soothe him. He was eating a substance that felt like life itself, fluid, resilient and smooth. In a world of rough grains and tough meats, the bird's nest offered a moment of absolute, frictionless perfection. It is a texture that demands attention. You cannot eat it mindlessly. You have to hunt for the strands with your tongue, separating the expensive gelatin from the cheap broth. It forces you to slow down. And in the end, perhaps that is what the money is really buying. A moment of quiet, slippery focus in the middle of a chaotic world. To cook a bird's nest is to engage in an act of supreme culinary anxiety. After the dangerous climb up the bamboo scaffolding, the ruthless sorting in the fluorescent facility, and the agonizing hours of tweezer work to remove the feathers, you are left with a material that is worth a fortune. And yet, it is chemically fragile. If you were to treat a dried bird's nest the way you treat a potato or a piece of pasta, if you were to simply throw it into a pot of boiling water and walk away, you would commit a financial tragedy. The violent agitation of the rolling boil would tear the delicate protein strands apart. The high, direct heat would cause the gelatin to dissolve completely into the water. You would return to the stove to find not a luxury soup, but a pot of expensive, slightly sticky water. The nest would be gone. Therefore, the preparation of the nest is defined by a single, overriding principle: protection. The cooking method used is almost exclusively double boiling, or dun in Cantonese. This is a technique of gentle, indirect heat that acts less like cooking and more like an incubation. The nest is placed inside a ceramic jar, often made of fine porcelain or purple clay. This jar is filled with cool water and sealed with a heavy lid. Then, the entire jar is placed inside a larger pot filled with boiling water. The physics here are crucial. The nest never touches a surface that is directly exposed to the flame. It is insulated by the ceramic and the water bath. The temperature inside the jar rises slowly, gently, and never quite reaches the violence of a full boil. It simmers in a state of thermal suspension. This allows the proteins to hydrate and expand without disintegrating. It preserves that prized elasticity, the snap we discussed earlier. The kitchen remains quiet during this process. There is no sizzling, no clattering of pans. There is only the soft, rhythmic rattle of the ceramic lid vibrating against the jar as the steam builds pressure. It is a sound of patience. Because the nest itself is flavorless, the medium in which it floats becomes the entire world of the dish. In the savory tradition, it might be a superior stock made from old hens and Jinhua ham, clarified until it looks like tea. But the most iconic preparation, the one served to emperors and influencers alike, is the sweet version, Bingtang Yan Wo, or bird's nest with rock sugar. Rock sugar is not your standard granulated white sugar. It is crystallized, unrefined cane sugar, sold in large, jagged yellow lumps that look like gemstones. In the philosophy of Chinese medicine, white sugar is considered damp and inflammatory. Rock sugar, however, is viewed as neutral or cooling. It has a cleaner, more subtle sweetness that does not coat the tongue or overpower the palate. It provides a glossy, translucent syrup that matches the aesthetics of the nest. The accompanying ingredients are chosen with the precision of a florist arranging a bouquet. They are there to provide contrast, both visual and medicinal. A few red jujubes or Chinese dates are often added. They bring a deep, fruity earthiness and are believed to replenish blood, balancing the cooling nature of the nest. A pinch of wolfberries or goji berries adds bright specks of orange. Sometimes, a slice of American ginseng is included for energy, its bitterness cutting through the sugar. Or perhaps a knot of pandan leaf is tossed in for the last 10 minutes, infusing the syrup with a floral, grassy aroma that smells like vanilla and rice. But restraint is the key. You do not want a fruit salad. You want a clear, suspended animation. When the lid is finally lifted after 2 or 3 hours of slow steaming, the result should be breathtaking in its simplicity. The soup should be perfectly clear. The rock sugar has dissolved completely, leaving no grit. The dates have swollen, their skins taut and shiny. And floating in the center, like a cloud of white silk or a bloom of jellyfish, is the nest. It has retained its shape. The strands are distinct, shimmering in the light. It looks pure. It looks expensive. It looks like liquid glass. When you serve it, Usually in a small, intricate porcelain bowl, you are serving a paradox, a dish that took hundreds of hours of human and animal labor to produce, yet looks as if it simply materialized from the steam. It is the ultimate comfort food for the wealthy, warm, sweet, slippery, and utterly, luxuriously uncomplicated. It demands that you sit down, shut out the noise of the world, and focus entirely on the sensation of swallowing a cloud. However, we must zoom out. We must pull our focus away from the solitary, meditative act of the double boiler and look at the map of the world. Because while the bird's nest began as a secret whispered in the corridors of the Forbidden City, it has ended up as a barcode scanned at a checkout counter in suburban California. The soup has left the kitchen and entered the supply chain. Today, the trade in edible birds' nests is not a quaint artisanal exchange between a climber and an emperor. It is a multi-billion-dollar global industry that rivals the trade in premium coffee or truffles. If you walk into a 7-Eleven in Bangkok, a pharmacy in Singapore, or a supermarket in Ho Chi Minh City, you will see the democratization of this luxury in real time. You will not see the raw, feather-choked cups that require hours of tweezer work. You will see small, squat glass jars, vacuum-sealed with metal safety buttons that pop when you open them. This is instant bird's nest. It is the Red Bull of the East, but instead of promising energy, it promises beauty. These jars sit in refrigerated rows, glowing under the fluorescent lights, costing perhaps $5 or $10. They are the mass-market echo of the imperial feast. But if you read the label closely, the illusion begins to thin. The ingredient list is dominated by water, rock sugar, and stabilizers like sodium alginate or agar. The actual bird's nest content might be as low as 3%. And this is not the super-grade cup we saw in the sorting room. This is the destination for the yan sui, the broken crumbs and dust that fell off the table during the cleaning process. It is a suspension of sugar and debris sold to office workers who want a quick hit of status on their lunch break. Yet, the existence of these cheap bottles has not diminished the value of the high-end dry trade. It has only highlighted the divide. For the true connoisseur, the only place to buy a nest is still the traditional apothecary. In these shops, which smell of dried scallops, ginseng and dust, the nests are kept in large glass jars behind the counter, weighed out on digital scales like gold dust. Here, the provenance matters. A wealthy matron will demand to know if the nest is from Vietnam, which is prized for its thickness, or from Indonesia, which is known for its volume. She will inspect the weave for the telltale signs of chemical bleaching. It is a tactile, high-trust transaction that feels centuries old. But moving this animal product across borders in the 21st century is a logistical nightmare. We must remember that legally speaking, a bird's nest is a biosecurity hazard. It is a raw animal byproduct. In the eyes of a customs officer in the United States, Australia, or Europe, it is not a delicacy. It is a potential carrier of H5N1, avian influenza. The fear of bird flu has created a fortress of regulations around the trade. You cannot simply mail a box of raw nests to your cousin in San Francisco. It will be seized and incinerated. To legally export nests to the West, or to the strict market of mainland China, the product must undergo heat treatment, effectively cooking it before it leaves the factory to kill any viral pathogens. It must be traceable. Modern boxes of high-end nests now come with QR codes that, when scanned, theoretically show you the specific birdhouse in Malaysia where the nest was harvested. It is an attempt to sanitize the dark, organic reality of the cave for the modern bureaucratic state. This regulatory pressure has pushed the trade into two distinct channels. The official channel, where nests are inspected, taxed, and sold in polished gift boxes at Costco or specialized Asian grocers in the West. And the grey market, the suitcase trade. Every day, Thousands of kilograms of nests move quietly across borders in the luggage of tourists and students, wrapped in newspaper, hidden inside tea tins, or taped to the lining of suitcases. It is a smuggling route fueled by the belief that the raw, untreated nest is more potent than the sterilized, government-approved version. So, we have reached a strange point in history. You can buy a box of birds' nests at a wholesale warehouse club in America, sitting on a metal shelf between the bulk vitamins and the smoked salmon. The nest has been scrubbed of its danger. The ammonia smell of the cave is gone, replaced by the sterile shrink wrap of global commerce. The risk of the climb has been amortized into the retail price. It has become just another commodity, a protein structure to be bought in bulk. And yet, even under the harsh glare of the warehouse lights, the price tag remains shocking enough to make you stop and wonder, what, exactly, are we paying for? Now that we have traced the money from the limestone cathedral to the fluorescent aisle of the warehouse club, we must pause. We have looked at the chemistry, the history, and the economics, but we have stepped around the most uncomfortable question in the room. We must look at the moral receipt of this transaction. When you strip away the velvet boxes, the imperial legends, and the medicinal claims, you are left with a stark, biological reality. We are eating a nursery. For centuries, this trade operated on a philosophy of infinite abundance. The caves were deep, the birds were many, and the emperor was far away. But biology has a breaking point. In the wild, the swiftlet's life is a finely tuned energy equation. It takes 35 days to build a nest. If that nest is taken immediately, the bird's biological imperative to reproduce forces it to build another. It draws on its reserves. It depletes its own body mass. If that second nest is also taken, the bird may try a third time, producing a smaller, weaker structure, or it may simply give up. In the height of the cave wars of the late 20th century, before the farming boom stabilized the market, this cycle turned tragic. Harvesters, driven by the exploding prices in China, began stripping caves clean before the eggs were even laid. They were not harvesting, they were liquidating the asset. Entire generations of swiftlets were wiped out because they had nowhere to land. The blood nest myth we discussed earlier is the grim monument to this era, a symbol not of potency, but of a species pushed to the brink of metabolic collapse. This brings us to the central ethical tension of the modern industry, the conflict between quality and compassion. The market demands a super-grade white nest, pristine, perfectly shaped, and free of feathers. To get this, the farmer must harvest the nest before the eggs are laid. This is the first harvest. It is the cleanest nest because no chick has lived in it, no droppings, no molting feathers. But to take it is to evict the bird at the moment of conception. It forces the bird to rebuild, doubling its labor. The ethical alternative is to wait. You let the bird build, lay its eggs, hatch the chicks, and raise them until they fledge and fly away. Only then, when the nest is abandoned, do you harvest. This is sustainable. It ensures the colony grows. But the resulting nest is a used home. It is trampled, stained with guano, and choked with feathers. It requires far more labor to clean, and it sells for a lower price. So, the market effectively penalizes the ethical choice. It pays a premium for the eviction and offers a discount for the patience. However, the rise of the Swiftlet Hotel has introduced a new, complex argument for symbiosis. The farmers argue that they are not poachers, they are bodyguards. In the wild, a swiftlet colony is a buffet for predators. Snakes scale the walls, hawks patrol the cave mouths, giant crickets eat the hatchlings. The mortality rate in a cave can be brutal. The hotel owner argues that he offers a trade. He provides a concrete fortress. He puts water moats around the walls to stop the ants. He puts bars on the windows to stop the owls. He regulates the humidity to protect the chicks from dehydration. In exchange for this 5-star protection, he claims the right to harvest the nest once the tenant has moved out. It is a landlord-tenant relationship where the rent is paid in saliva. Proponents of the industry point to the numbers. Since the rise of farming, swiftlet populations in places like Malaysia and Vietnam have exploded. The bird is no longer endangered. It is an urban colonizer. They argue that by commodifying the bird, they have saved it. If the bird had no value, no one would build a bunker to protect it. Yet, there is a lingering discomfort. Even in the best-managed hotels, we are interfering with a wild animal's instinct for our own vanity. We are turning a creature of the open sky into a livestock asset, managed by audio lures and concrete boxes. We have saved the species, perhaps, but we have domesticated its struggle. We have turned its supreme act of parental sacrifice into a renewable resource. And, as we look toward the future, we must ask if this strange truce between man and bird can hold, or if technology will finally render the swiftlet obsolete. If the history of the bird's nest trade is a story of humans chasing nature into the dark, the future of the trade may well be a story of humans trying to delete nature from the equation entirely. We have already moved from the dangerous limestone cave to the controlled concrete bunker. The logical next step, the final frontier of this industry, is to remove the bird itself. In sterile laboratories across Southeast Asia and China, scientists are currently working on the ultimate disruption: cellular agriculture. If we can grow beef in a petri dish without slaughtering a cow, and if we can synthesize vanilla without an orchid, then surely we can replicate the saliva of a swiftlet without the 35 days of exhaustion. The chemistry, after all, is known. We have mapped the proteome. We know the exact ratio of sialic acid to glycoproteins. We know the mineral structure. Theoretically, it is possible to brew a bio-identical bird's nest in a stainless steel bioreactor. You would simply feed a culture of cells a nutrient bath, wait for them to secrete the protein matrix, and then harvest it. No caves, no climbers, no feathers to tweeze, no ammonia smell, and, crucially, no ethical dilemma about evicting a bird from its nursery. But this technological horizon creates a paradox that threatens to collapse the entire value system of the luxury. We must remember the archivist's rule. Value is not just about chemistry, it is about story. A diamond grown in a laboratory is chemically identical to a diamond mined from the earth. In fact, the lab diamond is often superior, flawless, brighter, and harder. Yet, the market still values the mined diamond significantly higher. Why? Because the mined diamond contains the narrative of rarity. It contains the millions of years of geological pressure and the immense human effort required to find it. If you can print a perfect, super-grade bird's nest in a factory in Shenzhen for $10 a pound, you have not democratized the luxury. You have destroyed it. The moment the bird's nest becomes cheap and abundant, it loses its power to confer face. The billionaire does not want to serve his guests a bowl of industrial protein sludge, no matter how chemically accurate it is. He wants to serve them the struggle. He wants the story of the cave, or at least the story of the specific high-maintenance Swiftlet hotel. So, while the mass market for instant bottled drinks might embrace the lab-grown alternative, the high-end trade is doubling down on provenance. The future of the premium nest lies in aggressive forensic traceability. We are entering the era of the smart nest. Already, top-tier exporters are using technology to turn the biological product into a digital asset. We are seeing the introduction of DNA tagging and blockchain tracking. The goal is to create an unbreakable chain of custody from the wooden plank to the porcelain bowl. In the near future, when you buy a box of nests in Shanghai, you will scan a QR code that will not just tell you the country of origin, It will show you the GPS coordinates of the specific birdhouse. It might show you the date of harvest, the name of the worker who cleaned it, and the batch number of the heat treatment facility. This is the gamification of purity. It is an attempt to use data to justify the price tag. It assures the buyer that they are not eating a fake blood nest dyed with nitrates, nor a house nest passed off as a cave nest. It creates a digital aura of authenticity around the physical object. But the biggest threat to the future of the trade is not a lab-grown competitor or a counterfeit scandal. It is a simple shift in the wind of culture. We must ask, who will be eating this soup in 20 years? The current appetite is driven by a generation that remembers the scarcity of the past, a generation for whom the nest is a symbol of having made it. It is driven by the grandmother who believes in the cooling of the lungs and the mother who believes in the intelligence of the unborn child. But what of the next generation? The younger consumers in Asia are increasingly disconnected from traditional Chinese medicine. They are more influenced by global conversations about animal welfare and sustainability. We have already seen how quickly a status symbol can become a badge of shame. Look at the shark fin. In the span of 2 decades, shark fin soup went from being the mandatory centerpiece of every wedding banquet to a dish that many young couples actively ban from their menus. The cruelty narrative overwhelmed the prestige narrative. The bird's nest industry is safer than the shark fin trade because of the farming revolution. The swiftlet is not being hunted to extinction, it is being multiplied, but the ick factor remains. To a modern urbanized palate, the idea of eating the solidified saliva of a cave-dwelling bird, regardless of the health claims, is a difficult sell. It feels archaic. It feels messy. So, the industry stands at a crossroads. It might retreat into a niche, becoming a hyper-expensive relic consumed only by the very old and the very traditional, slowly fading away as the medical myths are debunked by modern nutrition. Or, it might reinvent itself yet again, pivoting from medicine to superfood, branding itself alongside collagen peptides and adaptogenic mushrooms for the wellness-obsessed Instagram generation. The swiftlet itself, however, is indifferent to our marketing problems. It is a survivor. It has survived the predators of the Jurassic jungle, the harvest of the Tang Dynasty emperors, and the concrete boxes of the 21st century. As long as there is a wall to cling to and a sky full of insects, it will keep building. Whether we continue to steal its home or finally decide to leave it in peace is a question that will be answered not by biology, but by the capricious, shifting tides of human vanity. We must return to the ledger. We must look at the receipt one final time. Is it worth it? When you stare into that translucent, gelatinous pool, suspended in its bath of rock sugar, what is the true exchange rate of this luxury? If we look at this strictly through the lens of biology or nutrition, the answer is a resounding, almost laughable no. A single chicken egg, costing mere cents, contains more bioavailable protein, a more complete amino acid profile, and more vitamins than a $100 bowl of bird's nest soup. If you are seeking collagen for your skin, you could boil beef tendons or fish scales for a fraction of the cost. If you are chasing sialic acid for your brain, you can find it in milk, or even in the saliva in your own mouth, though in lower concentrations. The chemical math simply does not add up. As a source of sustenance, the nest is a failure. It is an inefficient, overpriced delivery system for generic building blocks. But to judge the nest by its chemistry is to willfully misunderstand the nature of high-end consumption. We do not buy a diamond because it is a useful rock. We buy it because it is a difficult one. In the same vein, we do not eat bird's nest for the calories. We eat it for the suffering. That is a grim way to phrase it, perhaps, but it is the archival truth. When you pay $4,000 for a kilogram of white cups, you are purchasing the crystallized time of a living creature. You are consuming the 35 days of metabolic exhaustion that the swiftlet endured to spin that structure from its own body. You are eating its energy reserves, its parental sacrifice, its biological struggle against the void. You are taking the life force of the animal, its chi, and claiming it for your own, to replenish your own fading vitality. Consider the mouthfeel one last time. That slippery, frictionless glide is the physical manifestation of wealth. It is refined, removed from the grit of the earth. It is the opposite of the coarse, fibrous roots eaten by the peasant. To eat something so delicate, so easily destroyed, is the ultimate flex. It says that you are far removed from the hunger that drives the climber. And it is not just the bird. You are consuming the human risk. You are paying for the adrenaline of the man who climbed the 90-meter bamboo pole in the pitch black of Gomantong, balancing on a rotting stick above a floor seething with cockroaches, knowing that a single slip would turn him into a memory. You are paying for the blood money that supports his family in the village below. You are paying for the eyesight of the woman in the sorting room who spent 4 hours hunched over a magnifying glass, pulling out 3,000 individual feather fragments so that your soup would be smooth. This is the dark alchemy of value. The soup is expensive precisely because it is difficult. It is expensive because it sits at the intersection of danger and tedium. If the swiftlet built its nest on the ground, out of mud and grass, we would sweep it away with a broom. We covet it because it is placed just out of our reach, high in the damp dark, and because it requires a specific, frantic biology to produce. When you swallow that spoon of slippery, tasteless gel, you are ingesting a narrative of conquest. You are demonstrating that you have the resources to command the labor of the natural world and the industrial world simultaneously. You are eating history. You are eating danger. And in a world where everything is increasingly safe, sanitized, and mass-produced, the price of that raw, visceral struggle is the only thing that keeps the mystique alive. So, is it worth it? For the nutrients? Never. For the story? Perhaps it is the only thing that is. And now, the fire is out. The double boiler has gone cold. The story of the vertical grave, the bamboo grid, and the silent sorting room has finally been told. We are left alone in the quiet of the kitchen. It is time to step back from the edge of the limestone cliff. We can leave the darkness of the cave behind us, allowing the millions of bats and swiftlets to return to their chaotic, echoing symphony in the jungle night. We can leave the bright, harsh lights of the factory, allowing the workers to rest their tired eyes and put down their tweezers. Here, in the safety of your own space, there is no need for ladders or ropes. There is only the lingering warmth of the porcelain bowl and the heavy, comforting silence of the end. The dangerous climb is over. The soup has been served. The cost has been paid. Take a breath. Let the history settle. Rest well and leave the high places to the birds.